I think this is if it works out, it certainly solves a lot of problem regarding the future development of AI. But let me probe you a little bit, because I think it's harder than it appears to train something which is totally benevolent.
Yes, we don't know how to do it at present.
And I have a suspicion that you can sort of prove that it's not possible. I don't know, but I think I think, as you say, it's the greatest unsolved open problem in AI. So I think one should consider all the possibilities on the positive and on the negative side. So let me say a little bit about my thoughts, a kind of reaction to what you're saying. That I believe that in the world there are good people, there are bad people, but actually good people can turn into bad people under different circumstances. So I think that the idea of something being benevolent is also context sensitive. And if you grow up in a tough neighborhood, it's very hard to be a good person in the common sense. So my worry is that it's just like you bring up a child, and if it lives in a rich family, good neighborhood, and will become a gentleman and and get a Nobel Prize or something. But under extraordinary pressure, say in a battlefield, and a lot of times, that the philosophers do have a point in saying that these sort of things are different, because they can tell you sometimes you have to make a choice, to make a value judgment on. There are many examples of that kind. And if the robots get training for many of those kind of circumstances, because that if you really want to train a robot who is benevolent, you have to test it on many circumstances. And I suppose that if a good robot, if you put it under pressure, and it would be terminated if it did something wrong, it would become very cold-hearted. And I think there's nothing. So my point is that I think that in order to do what you say, the grand idea would be that we should first reform humankind. If we get a world where goodness prevails, and nobody has to do something under extreme pressure, and then if we train the robots in this fashion, and everybody will be happy afterwards. But that's an if and only if. If we cannot get humans to produce such a state, I don't think we can guarantee that the bad actors will not produce a hostile robots to kill all these benevolent robots.
Okay, so we don't have time. We've been trying for quite a lot.
The question you're asking me could be short, but I think that people want to hear you.
So we've been trying for a long time to make human society work. The United Nations didn't quite turn out how it was originally intended. It's not nearly as powerful as it was originally intended to be. I don't think we're going to be able to do that in time.
All right.
We're not going to be able to make humans, we're not going to be able to reform human society nearly fast enough to deal with the coming threat of superintelligent AI. There is an alternative answer, which sounds a bit like a Silicon Valley answer, which is, suppose we could make a mostly benevolent AI, and that could then design an AI that was more benevolent. It may be that the problem of making a benevolent AI, to solve it properly, you need an AI that's much smarter than us. So it might be that you could recursively make AIs more and more benevolent. It's sort of like boosting in machine learning. You have a weak learner, you turn it into a strong learner. That's one possible path. But like I say, at present, we don't know how to do it. I sort of don't think one of the options is to first reform human society. I don't think that's fast enough.
Yes, I can see a ray of hope in one circumstance, namely that suppose the progression of AGI is slightly gradual. It's not overnight. Suddenly, they dominate us. When the sign becomes so clear that the robots will take over the world, putting all mankind on one side of the boat. I think when that happens, it's just like we have a Martian invasion.
Right.
Then, under that circumstance, I believe it's possible, and perhaps that would be a good thing for us to learn the lesson, to know that the limitation of human. I think we probably are too ambitious. We believe that we can have anything, but the universe overall is not so benign. I think that we have the secret knowledge of quantum and the nuclear and the biological synthesis is not free. It imposes a danger that we human beings should know that we should treasure our good luck because it's really miraculous that we can so far come to this point and to appreciate all these brilliant ideas from these many hundreds of years of insight. I think that we should treasure it and we should treat each other nicely.
I
That's the hope.
completely agree with that.
Okay, now it's your turn.
Okay, so despite appearances, you know a lot of physics. I know very little physics. So I have some questions about physics. I've managed to disguise the fact I don't know any physics, but let me ask you a couple of questions about quantum computation. So the first question is, most physical theories break down under extreme conditions. So for example, for a long time, Newton's laws looked really good. They were really obeyed very precisely. And then it turned out that at very high velocities, they break down, and you need a more expansive theory. Do you think there's any possibility that our understanding of quantum mechanics won't survive, and that under some circumstances, for example, you won't be able to maintain very complicated entanglements, so that quantum computation relies on perfectly maintaining these entanglements? And maybe if there's something a bit imperfect under some circumstances, quantum computation actually won't work in the end. Is there any possibility of that?
I think according to the orthodox theory, quantum theory, the quantum theory should be valid independent of how many quantum bits are entangled with each other. But in practice, I think right now my physics friend told me the maximum number of particles getting entangled in a deep way that physicists have been able to produce is something like 60. So we are far away from the type of quantum computation that we would like to perform. So in that sense, it's really an open question, except that the view for physicists or natural scientists is that if you have something good, don't rock the boat until something turns to the contrary. So I recall that in the early days of quantum computing, I think you were aware that 1982 Feynman had that influential paper, and by the early 1990s, then computer scientists get involved. And I had several very respectable, really kind of top theoretical computer scientists who seriously doubt that for example, quantum factoring algorithm can actually work because the physicists have not been able to do things in the lab. I think they can, there are some natural systems for which the entanglement really could be infinite. If you have the Bose-Einstein, if you have neutral atoms, those kind of particles, they like friends in the sense that they want to sit on top of each other, and now when they are so close together, they become indistinguishable, and therefore that will give you a natural entanglement. It's a kind of a complete entanglement. But for things that we would like to do computation with, I mean, you don't want the particles to get confused with each other in the bits. I think that the answer is still out. And those friends of mine who are interested in this question is that I think they secretly want to win a Nobel Prize. They think that if computer scientists can design quantum algorithms and get implemented by physicists, and they turn out not to produce the right answer, then I think that, computer scientists made a great contribution by kind of creating a paradox in quantum theory. But that, I think right now, all my quantum physicist friends working on quantum computing, I think they totally ignore this possibility. I think that to them, I mean, that's the Bible.
So a second question, let's accept that it's going to work. Do you think, this is much more practical, do you think over the next, say, 10 to 15 years, quantum computing is going to have a big effect on AI? Or do you think the progress of AI is going to be done with classical computing?
I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it's really a kind of frontier questions for both AI and quantum computing, because the power of quantum comes from an ability perpendicular to those that are produced by AI. And so the natural question is that, as far as we know, in the world today, the ultimate computing power comes from building AI machines under quantum conditions. So in other words, you use quantum computers to do learning. So and in principle, we should get something better, because quantum definitely is, well, at least with the quantum is can do things that the AI cannot do. I mean, the factoring of large integer is, I think, very few people doing AI think of, actually AI, I mean, it's not always super intelligent. It cannot factor, we don't expect it to factor numbers. So we shouldn't fear AI that much, because, there are things we can do that the super intelligent machine cannot do.
Okay. So here's another question that's not about quantum computing. Some people think that what we're doing now in AI is creating alien beings. So they really are beings in some sense. And I've heard you say that if that's what we're doing, we need a psychology of these alien beings. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. I think we are creating aliens. This is literally the same as the synthetic biologists. Many of them are thinking that how do you just create life out of the lifeless chemical molecules? And so here we are constructing aliens in a different way. But I think this morning you mentioned that these super intelligent machines, they really are aliens. They may look like lovely tiger cubs, but they are not. And so I think that my sense is that even though we agree that if we banish the idea of consciousness and kind of what it means by understanding. From the vocabulary, we lose nothing in science, but actually it could be useful when we are trying to construct machines and to see whether to try to rein in them so that they will be more benevolent. And now, for that, I really believe that one should, at some point, the AI will lead to a separate discipline, which is the psychology of machines. And now, I think it's an interesting thing because the relationship between this psychology of machines, its relation with the ordinary psychology is the following. I think right now, basically, we are still, don't have AGI, so we still have things to learn from kind of human beings. Right now, all the intelligent machines, the prerequisite is that you have a designer who have the high-level structure determined, and the AI is mostly, when you come down to it, is the ability to search through a lot of possibilities in an intelligent way, sometimes in a mysterious way that we don't understand, we cannot prove. And in order to, suppose I don't care about whether I worry about safety. I just go ahead and want to design the smartest machine that I have and try to keep them benevolent. But the best guy is still human. That we employ smart human beings to try to think how to design the architecture. And I think for the moment, we can use human psychology as a guide to do a preliminary classification of machines and also as tests. But after a while, I believe the machine psychology will be tremendously more complicated than humans because they will be more shrewd than the worst of us in terms of deception. And so when they become that smart, then if we want to study psychology of them, I think you have to ask their own kind to develop an institute with a dean that is the machine himself.
Okay. Yes,
I think we are kind of. I think
we're over.
It's over.
Oh
yeah. So
we can't. It says 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think they are just.
It was so much fun.
I think they are just being kind to us. So maybe we shouldn't overuse their courtesy. And let's continue this back to the hotel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.